Hi everyone, I'm Utkarsh, the CEO of Network Capital. I hope you're all doing as well as people can these days and taking good care of yourself. These are incredibly tricky times, and I'm actually happy to invite two of my friends, Subhashish and Shreya, for a conversation about tech policy and the need of policy in general in the country to grapple through challenges and have a discussion about a new program that some of you might be interested in launching. At least for me, I've just realized the importance of including people in the public policy side of things when it comes to tech or otherwise. So let's begin with quick introduction. Shreya, Subhashish, who are you and what do you guys do?
Great. Thanks, Utkarsh, for the introduction. And yes, I hope everybody is safe in these times. I'm Shreya Sethi. I'm the country director for the International Innovation Corps and the Young Leaders in Tech Policy, which are programs of the University of Chicago Trust in India. And would be very happy to talk a little bit more about that, both the programs.
Hi everyone, I hope everyone's as well as they can be and staying strong and safe. I'm Subhashish Bhadra. I'm a principal at Omidyar Network India. ON India is a social impact firm that supports financially and otherwise entrepreneurs who help create a meaningful life for every Indian across 6 different areas. And in particular, my focus within the organization has been on the questions of responsible use of technology. So really delighted to be here and looking forward to speaking more about it.
Yeah. So Network Capital folks and other people who are listening, you would have seen Shreya's masterclass and Subhashish's masterclass on Network Capital TV. But today we are here to discuss one program specifically. So talk to me about the origins of the Young Leaders in Technology YLT program that you all are thinking about and have launched. What was the early days like and why should this program exist?
Great. Subhashish, you want to start? You started off earlier than I did, and then I'll jump in where we came in.
Yeah, happy to talk about it. So, look, I've been in this space of tech policy for about 5 years now. And as I went to different kind of events, as I spoke to different people in this space, the one thing that everyone acknowledges, including the lawyers, is that everyone in this space is a lawyer. That people from legal background, people who trained at law schools, they're the ones who dominate this space. And I think for many reasons, that's the right thing to do, because even right now, it's more of a regulatory issue that laws are being written about tech policy and everyone therefore needs to dot your I's and cross your T's. But what really struck me was that there weren't enough non-lawyers in this space. There were certainly not enough engineers. I'm an economist. There weren't enough economists. There aren't enough sociologists, etc. And for the space to truly transform itself outside the confines of public policy into a more general movement, I think that it's very important that people from different works, from different backgrounds, from different work experiences with different academic degrees come to the space. We first narrowed down on the problem of engineers because it would be rather ironic if on technology issues there aren't enough engineers who are opining on it, right? And if lawyers are writing tech laws and engineers are designing, and then there's a fundamental disconnect. And that is the disconnect that this fellowship sought to bridge. So I've been thinking about it for 5 years, but about a year and a half back, we kind of rethought what do we do about it, and that's when we decided to reach out to IIC, because we'd heard so many great things about the organization and about their ability to bring young talent to some of India's most difficult problems. And then we got on a call with them. There was a meeting of the minds, and that's when we decided to launch the fellowship. So with that, I'll hand over to Shreya for the rest of the story.
Yeah, and I think Utkarsh, your initial question about how were the being first days, this is like exactly a year ago in March, April. We decided we pretty much, once we got the go ahead to, do this, we launched within like 3 weeks. And, I remember Subhashish and us sitting at night and designing logos and approving things on the fly. And it was a lot of fun. It was really a lot of fun to design a program from scratch, really think about what is the need, what kind of host applications do we want. The interest that we actually saw from host applications was very encouraging. So we reached out to a lot of tech policy think tanks and institutes in the country today to say, is this something that you would value? Would you like, young talent coming in with the kind of background that, from an engineering background, an interest in tech policy, working with you for 2 years. And the interest was overwhelming. We got so many applications. Then we designed an entire training program. We were like, wait, once we have these young professionals into these organizations, what is the additional support do they require? And then we said that, we don't want to, yes, there's a lot of tech policy mentorship, a lot of tech policy training that they require, which we really hope that they'll get from their host organizations. But over and above that, we also said that they also need leadership development. They also need to understand how to be leaders in this space, where we're really hoping that tomorrow, once this fellowship is done, they are really the young folks that are driving tech policy in the country 2 years, 3 years from now. So that entire training program was the next thing that we designed, along with Umitya and other partner organizations. And then structuring what is the mentorship program going to look within the host organizations? How are they going to work closely with their host organizations, be able to get some time with them to, maybe on a weekly basis. So designing entire program around that. All of that was done within like literally 3 to 4 weeks, and we launched, had a great first application round. And we officially launched the program with 5 fellows in September 2020.
I know that there was huge appetite for this program because so many Network Capital community members applied. I'm very happy to share that a good chunk of your 5 fellows are Network Capital people who we've known, observed, worked closely with, and they are obviously very sharp folks doing. But tell me about the way you decided the curriculum. I know when people called us during office hours to discuss the application, the exercise, it was a very, very rigorous, laborious application process. So tell us about designing that, and what are you guys really looking for?
Shreya's screen looks frozen, so maybe while we wait for her to be back, I can get started on this. So look, I think for us, every word in what we wrote in the how we described the name of the fellowship was pretty important. It was young leaders, so we're very clear that we want people early in their career to come, because we would ideally want people to have that kind of commitment for the space. And we were very keen about leaders, right? What we were not looking for is like an engineer to come and help an NGO or a think tank build a tech platform. What we were clear is they should actually, in 10, 15 years, and maybe much sooner, be able to lead the space with their ideas and really transform it in the way we've seen several thought leaders do. And this is a space which lends itself to 30-somethings actually being extremely influential. So the reason the process was designed in the way it was designed, because it was you're trying to optimize for too many things. You're trying to optimize for, are these people going to stay in the space for long term? Do they have kind of, is this their interest area? Do they have the kind of values that we, both of us as organizations, espouse in the kind of technology we build that should be inclusive, transparent, etc. And of course, we are trying to optimize for the hard skills as well, because this is a very complex space. You have so many policies coming out, and there are so many people who are opining on it, that for you to form a differentiated opinion is a very big intellectual challenge. So, which is why we designed the program to be pretty rigorous, the selection process to be pretty rigorous. But it wasn't so much from the perspective that we got some, Shreya could correct me, but some 230, 240 odd applications, and we selected 5. It was a really low selection rate, but it wasn't designed that, oh my God, we have to be this exclusive fellowship. But more importantly, because this is a space that is constantly evolving, and you really want to make sure, to be fair to the fellows, that those who come into the space really understand what it takes. And are kind of equipped to deal with it. So that's why it's designed. The selection process is designed the way it is. But I think for me, at least, what was great was there were 220 odd people in India who were really wanting to enter this space, which is a pretty narrow space even today. But with that, Shreya, now that we have you back, I'll let you come in.
Yeah, sorry. I think I had a little bit of an internet problem. I heard, I think you said number of applications. So we had 288 applications in the first year with the kind of timelines we had. And, so yes, it was really exciting. And I think the 5 fellows that we have are just spectacular. So been
what makes them spectacular? Because it'll be a hint into what you guys are looking for this year. We want all the fellows to be Network Capital community members, but that's just our secret wish. But tell us what you're looking for, and we'll pass on the hints to them. Actually, many of them are watching right now. So yeah.
What are we looking for? We're always looking for, I think, passionate folks, right? We're looking for people who are really passionate, really care, really want to make a change, really, it's something that they care deeply about and are willing to kind of dedicate, the next whatever 5-10 years of their life to really working on. We're looking for people who, like Subhashish was mentioning, are leaders, right? Like we're looking for people who can really take the leadership role within some of these organizations, can really grow to be the leaders that this tech policy space looks for in the future. There are people who are coming with some kind of understanding of technology and engineering. They don't need to come with an understanding of tech policy, right? That is not an expectation, but an interest in tech policy, an understanding of technology and technology trends. We're looking for folks that do care about, do have an understanding, some level of saying that, okay, but this is what policy in terms of, this is how government makes policies and this is how policy interacts with the common man. The role isn't necessarily about tech policy within a tech policy in a large tech firm. So like, it's more about, tech policy in terms of, government public policy. So I think that differentiation is important. So Ashish, what else are we looking for?
I like to say that we are looking for people who are really comfortable getting lost in the right direction, because I think this is a very ambiguous space which is fast evolving. I've been here 5 years. It looks so different from 5 years ago. 5 years ago, Aadhaar was the rage. Everyone was talking about it. That was the big discussion. Right now, it's completely different set of things, and so people have to be able to adapt and keep moving ahead. And I think this space, because it's nascent, people can actually build stuff. But more importantly, in the last year, because of all these challenges that COVID threw up, including remote working, these fellows have not really been able to actually go to their office regularly, right? And for someone to come on board in that kind of a situation and start contributing, which I'm glad all these 5 fellows have done, but it's a really challenging thing to do. So I think people who are really comfortable dealing with all of that ambiguity are also important.
For sure, I think the ability to nurture ambiguity is so important in today's policy environment, not just in India, but also globally. But I would imagine testing for passion, testing for leadership, testing for tech knowledge, this is very nebulous, right? But both of you are very accomplished young professionals. Do you allow for the fact that there might be a lot of variability in what you consider passionate vis-a-vis like somebody who's not?
Absolutely. I think, there isn't a one structure that fits all. And I'm pretty sure if you look across the 5 fellows, you'll see many, they really aren't like replications of each other, right? So I think and in fact, I think one of the key things that is differentiating between the IISc and YLT fellowships is that we actually do have the host application, the host organizations interview the fellows as well, because I think the fit between the host applications. Sorry, am I audible?
You are, Shreya. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Just felt like everybody was frozen. The fit between the host organization and the fellows is something that's really important to us as well, right? So it's not just fit to YLT program. It's also each host organizations, and we would love to talk a little bit more about them as well, are very different in nature. So we have IT for Change and NIPFP, which are very core research organizations, and they needed somebody who was willing to go deep into core research and like go deep into one topic for like a couple of months and just work on that. On the other hand, we have EGA Foundation, Foundation for Ecological Security, which are much more implementation focused organizations, Civic Data Labs, which are much more working on creating tech solutions for the grassroots or for the government organizations that they support, or for the general public at large. So there we were looking for a mix of people that were able to be a little bit more project implementation focused, but also bring in a tech policy lens onto sustainability of technology, inclusivity of technology, right? How we really thinking about who this technology is eventually going to be used for. So the fit of the young fellow with this organization was something that was really important as well, beyond just being a fit with YLT.
That's really interesting. So tell us a bit about the days in the life of a fellow. What is, I know there is no average day, plus we're in the midst of a crazy pandemic. So how have you designed the fellowship? What have been some of the most challenging parts from the points of view of both of you?
Sure. So the way the fellowship is designed is really that we embed these young professionals for a period of 2 years within one selected organization, and then they largely work with that organization as a core team member. Alongside that, there's a lot of training and management and mentorship support that ISC provides with an engagement manager, as well as very regular checkups with Umitya and Subhashish and the senior leadership team there. But then within the host organization, their day-to-day looks really different. So I was saying, I think the fellows that Tanya and Gaurav that work with IT for Change and NIPFP are currently working on very core research programs. So they're going deep down and working on research studies, which maybe Subhashish can also talk a little bit more about. And then, on the other hand, we have Deborah, who's really working with FES on designing what grassroots tech implementation looks like, right? Like really working with folks in the grassroots to understand how do you create data observatories and what are like some of the tech policy things to keep in mind. In addition to that, what the fellows have done over the last 8 months is that collectively they've also written, right? So there's a lot of op-eds that they're writing on topics that are in the news about pertaining to tech policy. They took part in a couple of conferences. So they presented at Mars Fest, that was a few months ago. Collectively, in fact, currently we're thinking about designing a tech policy curriculum for ISPP to really encourage how it can move beyond, the program can impact folks beyond just YLT, right? So how can we design maybe short courses with a few public policy schools so more people can understand what tech policy really is and make the use of this entire network. We also work very closely with the Ministry of IT, and some of the fellows, support work where they're doing their on open data as well, so research work, but also supporting a working group that we've created. So while they are all essentially aligned to their host organizations, we do have combined projects that they do as YLT fellows, as well as a lot of exposure that we provide to the fellows through training, management touch points, and mentorship.
Awesome. Yeah, because the only thing I'd add is, look, there's no typical day because there is no typical fellow, because there's no typical career in this space, right? So what we try very hard to do, and which is very difficult to get right, but we're doing our best, is to make sure it is customized to what the fellow wants and where they see their career going. So we do spend a lot of time upfront making sure the matching of the fellow to the host organization is the right one, right? You can't put someone with an implementation mindset suddenly in a purely research organization. Yeah. So a lot of our bandwidth and time was spent there. Once they go there, IISc speaks to them probably once in 2 weeks, once in a month, and make sure that everything's on track. Shreya and I also speak to them fairly regularly, and we almost try to develop a kind of informal and increasingly formal development plan, which is, hey, you want to work more with government, let's create those opportunities. So between the network that IISc brings of working very closely with government and the network Umitya brings of being in the tech policy space, we try to pull in all the resources we want, because I think for us what's important is they have a good experience and they get a good flavor of the sector, and then they might choose to exit or they might choose to stay. But therefore we try to create these customized paths for everyone.
Understood. Yeah. Let's talk about debate. So depending on where one stands on the political spectrum, one might say that disagreements with certain governments may not be as feasible as one would have hoped. So what does YLT hope to, do when, say, a fellow has a different point of view than, say, a department? In that circumstance, what do you tell fellows?
It's a different view from a department and a
government. I think, for example, let's take India. Obviously, seems to have a very particular view of, tech policy, at least, when it comes to data, e-commerce, and a bunch of other things. India has decided to take a particular stance. Are you all or YLT fellows expected to align with that stance and move forward, or not?
So, I mean, Subhashish, I can start and you can answer. So I think one of the things that we do, like we were saying, was that we have every second week, we have a training session, right? Where we invite speakers on different topics, or such topics like you mentioned, data privacy, facial algorithms, etc., to talk with them. It's a very close group, non-recorded session. And post the session, they have debates, right? You were mentioning. So there's a lot of debate that they have among each other, right? we definitely should see differences in opinion. We do have people coming in with different points of views, which is highly encouraged. But it's a debate. They learn from each other, they communicate with each other, and they share opinions. Outside of their closed group and peer interactions within their host organizations, they work largely with their host organizations. Some of them do write memos, respond to to policy documents that come out in for open consultations, very much as part of their host organizations. And that is very much expected. What we help them do is help them, give them training on how do you write such policy documents or feedbacks, right? Not so much in providing them an opinion. That is something that we hope that what we would like to encourage them to do is have a mind of their own and have the ability to think through take a lot of data and come up with their own opinions.
Yeah, you don't want to cultivate a cadre of yes men and yes women. That will not be in line with the fellowship, I think. But Subhashish, do you have any thoughts or opinions?
Look, at the end of the day, these fellows are usually placed at non-profits, right, which are either research organizations or implementation organizations. And IISc takes a lot of care to make sure the organizations that are selected also have a rigorous process. So I believe last year there were some 15, 20 odd applications, of which 5 were selected. And while selecting, a lot of attention is paid to the kind of work culture that they promote. And issues of transparency, debate, and openness are really very central to the selection of a host organization within YLT. So we only
which
work
could be a government department or a non-profit. I think in a non-profit it is slightly easy to understand. In the government, I was wondering what it is.
At this point, we haven't opened up the... Sorry, go ahead, Shreya.
Yeah, so the YLT program is actually only open to non-profits and think tanks. The IISc program works with government, not the YLT program.
I see. That is helpful to know. When you look at the way fellows have engaged or emerged in the past year, pandemic has been something that every department, every nonprofit, every organization has experienced. Do you think that has dampened the fellowship experience?
I mean, I would say that yes, in the sense that I think there was a lot more peer-to-peer interaction that we were hoping for. There was a lot more, in-person. Even with the Umidya team, we had planned for having quarterly meetups in Bangalore, with a larger cohort. We were hoping to have, so the program was structured in a way that we had 2 international conferences that we wanted the fellows to attend and get a lot more international exposure as well. From that perspective, I definitely think that it's dampened them. I think from a work exposure, I think it's been easier to adapt than maybe the government fellowship, because largely everybody was equipped to kind of move to an online model and work remotely. Some of the fellows did end up relocating to, so when things were a little bit better a few months ago, people did relocate and did start working in person. But I think the larger peer-to-peer learning and interaction trainings, etc., and conferences was hit.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's both a challenge as an opportunity. It goes without saying that this year would have been a hard one, but this is also a year when the country really needed policy leaders to come forward and think through. So, are there some interesting examples or case studies that you want to mention that talk about the importance of what the fellowship is about and what?
So, Ashish, I'm going to hand that over to you.
Yeah, I mean, it would be difficult to pick favorites from all the interesting projects people are doing. So maybe I can talk about one, and Shreya, I'll hand over to another one for you to talk about. In this entire situation that has happened with COVID, non-profits have had to really step up and use technology to step up. And FES as a grassroots organization has had the opportunity to do that a lot more. And in particular, they have a system called the India Observatory, where they're putting a lot of geospatial data together. For example, when the migration crisis was happening last year, they put out maps of where are the various pit stops, what are the migration routes, what are the amenities available, etc. And then lots of these kind of geopolitical and geospatial information that is being put out in India Observatory. So one of the cool things I think Deborah is working on is how do you build a sense of community and inclusivity into how these platforms are built, because otherwise they can be fairly technocratic exercises of saying, hey, here's the data, here's kind of the GPS, here's how I'm going to plot it. But how do you make technology work for the communities that it is meant to serve? And how do you translate that abstract notion into something that's actually very implementable by technologists is the problem that she's dealing with. And I think that's really cool, and I think it also really speaks to how the COVID response is supposed to go. So that project I thought was a really interesting one. Shreya, what's kind of one that comes to your mind?
So I think, that was an implementation project. So maybe, the research project that Tanay and Gaurav have been working have been also really interesting. They've been working, Gaurav's been working on facial recognition, algorithms in India. And we know that many state governments are now experimenting with this, which is largely still an unproven technology. So, what is maybe the impact of those technologies? Tanya has been working on interesting things like data feminism, which I will not even pretend to understand what it is. Maybe Subhashish can explain. So some of the things that they're working on are like really going into deep research and things that will we hope help lay the platform for policy decisions that are coming. I think Subhashish said this earlier, which I thought was, very relevant, that technology is changing faster than policy can keep up with it, right? So we're actually having to anticipate what is the policy requirement, what is the technology that's going to come up, and can we already lay the base for that? Can we already have enough research and enough insights so that when the policy makers start thinking about what is the policy around this, there is data to give to them, there's research to give to them. So that is some of the stuff that the research fellows have been working on, which I'm very excited to see the output for. We are also, the other thing that's also been interesting is that while the fellows are largely working with one host organization, I know Tanay, within the organization, he's supporting IT for Change, is also actually through IT for Change supporting 3 other grassroots organizations on ground on technology development that they are doing, right? So Pradhan is doing technology development, National Rural Livelihood Mission is doing technology development, and where they are working with them to help them understand how to create more sustainable and inclusive technology. So it's really, it's again like setting these guys up to really be leaders and, be mentors to even other other organizations that maybe don't have the need for a full-time fellow, or, cannot really, are not large enough organizations to be able to absorb a fellow full-time.
Understood. So how do these wonderful projects reach the government, or is the plan to one day also have government people, fellows work in the government or support them? For example, data feminism, or, I know Subhashish cares a lot about privacy. There are, government does need very tangible, practical inputs from the outside. And I think these fellows have a unique role to play. So what's the plan there, or is there a plan at all?
It's a difficult one to grapple with, right? And obviously IISc has a ton of experience in actually making sure that fellows who are placed within government are effective and have a good experience. In this case, because it was the infancy of of this fellowship, we wanted to make sure we actually first place fellows in contexts in which we feel like we'll be able to make sure that their experience is good. Government is a pretty unique experience, and I think as the program expands, perhaps that could be a conversation one could and should have. But look, I think the point is most of these organizations work fairly closely with government already, right? But just by placing them within the context of a more flexible, dynamic organization rather than the government, that provides more variety. So, for example, e-Governments Foundation, right? I mean, all of their job is really with government. So that's very directly there. Even IT for Change, as Shreya said, Tanya is working with the National Rural Livelihood, the mission there. There's FES, which also interacts with the government at so many forums. So almost all these host organizations, and Civic Data Labs works fairly closely with many state governments as well. So all these organizations do work with government. It's almost like you can't, when you're dealing with tech policy, you can't stay away from the government. But we felt this is the structure that currently provides the best experience, and that over time one could always reflect on it.
Incredible. So again, like, since they do tell the governments, do they sometimes tell the governments uncomfortable truths?
So I think we don't influence that. I think we largely leave it to the host organizations to work with them on that. And I think, they're very free. We don't either control or, dictate any of those things.
Good. So you let the fellows basically decide based on data. Like, you don't tell them to behave a certain way and, be certain types, because that would be a very unfortunate occurrence. And I know that I trust you both to not go down that path, but I have seen this happen more often than one would have hoped in various quarters. So good to know. Let's now turn the tide and imagine what is India's tech policy, because if you look at the past 5 years, so much has happened. Mobile penetration has increased. India came out with a draft paper, I believe, on AI, also on e-commerce. Blockchain was supposed to come out, did come out, quasi. So a lot going on. Then there are private sector organizations, both Indian and not so Indian in the mix, and there are non-profits. Some of the most important issues, if you look at, say, privacy, security, AI, data, e-commerce, do you really think India has a tech policy or a tech strategy?
So I'll start there and then hand over to you. Look, I think saying tech policy is almost like saying development policy, in the sense it's so cross-cutting.
So much,
there's no one tech policy, but
so let's take any strands, anyone that you like.
At this point, I think, look, India does have a certain paradigm and certain narratives that are driving how we are setting policies. Right? There's firstly one around kind of what one might call data nationalism, that look, the economic value of data and technology should accrue to Indians. And you're seeing a lot of policies, from the e-commerce policy to the data protection bill, everything's reflecting that data nationalism strand. Then there's a strand around basically sovereign interests, so law enforcement, societal well-being, misinformation, hate speech, all of these, right? And that strand you also see across policies. So I think it's not explicitly stated that, hey, here are the 5 things we will see in all policies, but once you start looking at these policies, you figure out there are certain underlying factors that are driving all of these. And obviously there's this whole thing around technological growth, right? There's a keenness, especially in COVID times, not to tie up industry with too many regulations, and that's possibly also what's pushing out a lot of these regulations. So I think there is an underlying theme. The way it manifests itself is we try to track this every quarter. Every quarter there'll probably be like 2 consequential decisions regarding tech policy, and you will see these strands being reflected in that. So for example, the most recent one was the intermediary liability rule. So how do you control social media and how do you make sure fake news isn't spreading there? In January, you had the non-personal data, right? So I think the way I would think of it, Utkarsh, is there's this mosaic of regulation that will be put in place. Even if you think of environment regulation, it's not like there's just one law, right? There's a mosaic of laws at the central and state level. So even the regulation of technology is going to be the mosaic of laws, and that is evolving, and that is being put in place as we speak. And which is also the reason why we think this fellowship is particularly important at this point in India's journey. Because at this point in India's journey, India is putting all of these regulations in place. This wasn't true 5 years back, may not be true 5 years from now. So I think we are at a very pivotal moment here where there's a certain mindset. And I think it is, and I'm sure the government and everyone else will benefit from having new perspectives enter the space.
Absolutely. I think if one thing that is required are new perspectives, we honestly could do it, a bit more on blockchain, Bitcoin, because some of the decisions, one would say, leave us wondering what's the plan here. But I think hopefully the fellows can challenge that and bring in the right kind of nuance and deliberation in the debate. I actually love the fact that 2 influential organizations, UChicago and Omidyar, are involved but not interfering. And I think that's an interesting stance to take. Let's try and look at the way you visualize this fellowship, say 10 years from now, 15 years from now. So when we began this discussion, we started saying that we had a meta sense that, hey, these should have a role in the way the country is run, the tech policy is shaped. But give us more insights into what that would look like. Where in the social network of policymakers do you really see them? Because social networks are super important in the way policy gets done in India and many other countries. Where do you see, what specific role do they see? Do you see them as people who will be academics, practitioners, heads of NGOs, perhaps in the government, none of the above, all of the above? I know it's impossible to predict the future, but give me your best guess.
I would say all of the above. I would simply say, if you ask me, like 10 years down the line, I would want it to be that every, tech policy think tank in India, the different government entities, the NGOs, all have somebody from YLT who's a YLT fellow as part of the organization or leading that organization. Something we're interestingly seeing at IIC, right? We're seeing IIC alums across board, right? We're there with different foundations, there with different NGOs, grassroots organizations, with government. And really, I think, we would see YLT associated with everything tech policy in India in the next 10 years. I would also like to expand, I think, to South Asia. I think that would be interesting, because, I think there are policy issues that we could talk about in not just India, in South Asia as well.
Look, from our perspective as an organization that backs entrepreneurs in the for-profit, non-profit, and public sectors, what we'd love to see is for these 5 and however many fellows we have in subsequent years to really be entrepreneurs, to go and start non-profits, to go and start for-profits, consulting firms, whatever else, right? But really take that leadership mantle and be entrepreneurs in their own rights.
Yeah, so well said. Love the vision of expanding to South Asia. Love the fact that these fellows will hopefully one day be builders. Now, talk to me about the first point a bit more, say expanding to South Asia or taking a global outlook to policy, right? Of course, data nationalism is one side of the debate, but anyone, building anything should build in India for the world, or, have India engage with the world meaningfully. So at a policy level, what are some examples of country-to-country collaboration or builder-to-builder collaboration that you've seen? Both of your organizations are international, so I'm sure that you would have seen that in practice. How do you see that happen, or how might that take place, if and when?
I'm not sure I understood the question. For YLT, I think when, Medya and us got together, we did say that we felt like India, with the amount of technology development that was happening within the government and, the kind of digital initiatives coming up, would need a lot more tech policy professionals in the coming years. So we are and are still very much focused on India and tech policy leaders development in India for the next few years.
And my question was, how do you have these India leaders engage with other leaders to develop a policy that works for India and for the world? Right? Because you want products to come from here, hopefully, and go everywhere.
Yeah, got it. I think one of the ways we do that is very clearly by, all the kind of trainings we do. So the trainings that we've had for them has not been India specific. We've invited folks from actually across the globe to talk to them about what they're doing there. And we, some of the training sessions that we've organized for them, not just, the individual talks, but like the actual courses they could do, have also been international courses. And we're very much encouraging them, through different channels to, within their host organizations itself, they are collaborating on papers, etc., with people from different, areas and organizations. We haven't, officially done any partnerships with global organizations. As yet, I would say.
But I think, Utkarsh, being international was kind of built into the DNA of the program. So we are very keen that these fellows actually go out and listen and interact with everyone in the world, which is why every fellow under the program is entitled to 2 international trips to go to any conference of their choice. They want to go to an engineers conference, feel free to. They want to go to a lawyers conference, feel free to. We don't set boundaries on US or Africa or wherever. Go wherever you want to. Of course, COVID hasn't permitted that. But it was always meant to, in that sense, be a fairly international outlook to work being done in India.
Yeah. In fact, I noticed some of the IIC fellows recently organized this Emerging Market Summit in U Chicago, which I thought was really well done. It talks to the merit of the program, that everything that U Chicago and Omidya do typically work out well. But what I found really interesting was that it was focused on emerging markets, but emerging markets as emerging markets engaging with each other, and emerging markets also creating and shaping outlooks for international. So there were people from all around. And I think, those examples give me a lot of hope of how one day YLT and IIC could perhaps have a real cadre of professionals who are asking difficult questions, bringing international perspective. And honestly, on the social network point, I think that they could, by virtue of being builders, occupy a really central position in the geometry of the policy social network in India. So at least I'm really bullish on this. Just like concluding thoughts from both of you about how might this year look like? Would it be very similar to last year? Nobody can say right now. But walk us through different scenarios. Scenario A, B, C. Say COVID being one factor. Other issues might come up. I would particularly like to listen to your comments on what Harari says, that some of the changes brought about in the middle of emergencies usually tend to last a lifetime. So if there is any thought being conducted on that so far.
Look, I mean, I think at a very personal level, all of us, things are clearly much worse than they've ever been, right? So at a personal level, I think all of us need to brace up for that. And I think for us also, it becomes important as people organizing this fellowship to have these conversations with our fellows and make sure their experience is least disrupted from what it is supposed to be. But I think your question about Harari's quote was also somewhat of a macro picture, right? And we have certainly seen a lot of that happen last year in terms of macro trends on the kinds of technologies being rolled out by the government. And these will not be kind of undone, right? If we, for example, we rolled out a certain digital platform to do vaccinations for COVID, what prevents that kind of digital infrastructure to be used for other vaccinations in the future as well? So there's an acceleration of technology that's happening, almost like demonetization, accelerated digital payments, right? So to that extent, I think all of us need to be really mindful about these kind of technological deployments and the kind of consequences that they will have. But at the same time, honestly, of course, I do feel very optimistic about this particular space. That I feel like last year when Arogya Setu was being made mandatory, the code was not open source. It was a proprietary code being hidden behind a wall. And that's when civil society mobilized in many different voices. There were people who went to court, there were people who wrote op-eds, there were people who reverse engineered the code and put it out in the public anyway. And that led the government and there were many people who actually went ahead and reached out to the government department and said, hey, let us help you. And all of that civil society, which very often seems like disconnected, seems like they're not coordinating, etc., etc. But that's the beauty of democracy, that these guys actually made sure that the Arogya Setu platform, wasn't mandatory in as many places. It was initially conceptualized, it was open source, many improvements were made to the platform. And that's what makes me optimistic. The only reason all of us aren't having to use those kind of technologies every day for every function is because tech policy as a community pushed back in a certain way. And now also you see recently there was the social media rules that were brought out recently. Some 52 odd Twitter posts were taken down, and now there's a question around, hey, why were those Twitter posts taken down? Because they were critical of the government's handling of the COVID situation, etc., etc. And once again, we see tech policy has really become central to the organization. So I think 3 years back, because if you ask me, hey, is your work really relevant to the ordinary Indian? Are you dealing with an elitist issue? Maybe I didn't have a very compelling answer, but I think the last year has clearly shown for this space that the issue that the people in the space are working on, the issues that the fellows are working on, are really central to India itself. So to that extent, I'm pretty optimistic, but it's going to be a tough year, and I think all of us need to brace for that.
Absolutely.
Really well said.
There's no question, like, it's going to be a tough year, and we don't really know when this is, what the next few months, a year look like. But exactly like Subhashish, I think one of the things we are also seeing, we saw over the last year, let's forget this last month, is a massive increase in technology adoption, or the massive multiple government entities now coming out and wanting to do stacks, right? I think it's the new buzzword. So there's like every department coming out and saying, let's do a stack. And
I
in some
love
cases,
our reverence for buzzwords in certain department is obviously interesting.
I mean, you have no idea how many government departments I currently work with which want to do a stack, right? And then I'm like, wait, what do you even mean? And they're like,
I wish somebody knew. Yeah.
I wish somebody knew. Exactly. The only one that I know is really happening is like a cow stack, interestingly. So
Are you
that's
serious?
actually,
Is that a thing?
it is a
Okay.
thing. So so yeah, so so there is this rush, and I mean, again, I would say that it's both pros and cons, right? We do see technology adoption increasing overnight. Within the last year, everybody is online, right? Because that's the only way you could do so many things. And I mean, I don't mean just your upper middle class or middle class. We're seeing people online that were never going to be online, right? And we're just seeing so many more people with access. On the flip side, obviously, we are seeing that the fact that everything is online is making there is a large segment of society that is cut off from basic access, right? So, but the awareness is also there. Now people are talking about the fact that we're talking about edtech, but does edtech really work for a large segment of population? So I feel like a lot more problems that maybe civil society was always talking about and kind of harping on for maybe a long time are now becoming a little bit more obvious to the larger section of society. These things that are happening today aren't happening today. They were always happening. It's just that they're impacting normal people now, right? And that, so now suddenly people are talking about it, and to me it kind of feels like maybe that'll lead to some kind of change. There was always a migrant problem. I'm sorry, COVID did not create a migrant problem. There was always a healthcare problem. There was always a education problem. There was always an access problem, right? There was always a livelihoods employment problem. These things are not created by COVID, but they are brought to light by COVID. And now that they're brought to light, can we actually do something about it?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm hoping, that putting a positive spin to things, that just some kind of people being pushed out of inertia, the kind of money that I'm seeing Utkarsh flow out of people's pockets today is when we've been putting out reports. I know Midya's been putting out reports on Indian philanthropy and how Indian philanthropy needs to step up. But if we today talk about within a week how people got shook up and the kind of money that's flowing out, maybe it can be a sustained effort. Maybe we can have a change in mindset and say that we can do this on a more regular basis. It doesn't have to be crisis to crisis.
Really well said. And which is one reason I and the entire Network Capital team really believe in the programs that you're launching. There's urgent need to solve these problems for Indians, especially who are marginalized. It's absolutely not an issue just for elites that one day might be impacted. The issue is now and here. And having seen the quality of fellows and having known them for many years through Network Capital, I know that the country is in good hands and it has the necessary support which it really needs to get some of its policy decisions right in the long term. Just lastly, I know it's a very competitive process. Tell us where people can find more information about FAQs, last day to apply, etc., and any parting tips from either of you would be great.
No, and I really want to thank you, Utkarsh. Network Capital has always been a great partner to us, and they've always helped us promote the program applications. And I think the kind of talent we get from Network Capital has always been exceptional as well. So really, thank you so much for being such an outstanding partner over the years. The application is open. We, keeping in mind current situation, we had a lot of folks reach out to us saying that we're struggling. We have extended the deadline. It's going to be open now till the end of May. So 30th May is application deadline. We extended it by 15 days. we are still hoping to keep the program on timelines. We'll just have a little bit of a crunch from our side in reviewing and interviews, etc. We would still hope to have the program go live on 1st of September, like we did last year. All information, FAQs are available on our website. There is an innovation prompt, which means that people have to pick a particular topic, which is a given statement, and write a 2-page innovation solution around that particular prompt. Based on the selection of that, we will be inviting a few people for the next round of interviews. The process is fairly long because, like we were mentioning earlier, we do want to fit with the host organization as well. We've completed the host application round. We've had a phenomenal number of applications this year. We're very excited. We're just going to be finalizing that soon. And I think we could, once we finalize that next week, we should be able to announce them. So, people will have an idea of what kind of host organizations they're looking at as well.
Great. Shreya, so you mentioned something, and I would love your opinion as well as Subhashish's on that. I know, again, from many Network Capital members, they do have questions about the prompt. They find it slightly confusing. So any and all advice on that particular front would be really useful from both of you.
Sure, and please do feel free to email, the YLT team. There's Raghav Chopra, who's the program manager. There's me. Please feel free to reach out on our LinkedIn page or on the email ID. We do reply to everything. So the prompt again is a way for us to help us understand how somebody thinks about a given solution, right? We do expect people to do some basic research. We do expect them to go and understand what is this, what is the topic talking about. It is not expected to be written on the go in one sitting. It is, the expectation is that somebody spends a little bit of time understanding what is the topic, coming up with some kind of creative solution, and critiquing their own solutions, which helps us think about how they think about a given problem. Are they able to structure it? Are they able to come up with possible challenges that they might incorporate in coming up with this problem, and then find solutions to that? Those are the things that we are really looking at while thinking through the prompt. We are very particular about the given page limit, reference sheets, etc. So we do request people to stick to that.
Got it. Thanks.
Subhashish?
That's very comprehensive. The only thing I'd say is, look, there's no, like in most things in tech policy, there's no right or wrong answer. I think it's to test the method, it's to test the journey that you take rather than where you reach. And
so let me pose a specific question which comes to us very soft, because many times fellows are generally bright people but may not have necessary expertise on a particular policy prompt. So what's your advice to somebody like that?
Research, read up. We have made sure, when I had the first set of innovation prompts given to me by the current YLT fellows, I sent them all back. I said, guys, a year ago, you might not have been able to answer this. Now you guys are tech policy experts. So we made it simple. We're not trying to, we don't, like we said, we're not looking for tech policy experts. We're looking for bright folks, like Subhashish was saying, right? That can have a mind of their own, can have an opinion of their own. That's what we're testing for. So, but we do expect you to research. We do expect you to see what we didn't want to do. I should be honest. Why we have this particular a step in the journey is because we don't want, it's very easy to send in a cover letter and resume for an application, right? We want people who really
buzzwords, right? It can be a lot of buzzwords strung together.
Yeah. Exactly. So we want somebody to spend at least that much time in, looking up the issue, having an opinion, reading maybe 10 papers about it, and then coming up with something.
Yeah. No, really well said. And as Subhashish said, you have an opportunity to become a first mover and maybe help shape the tech policy for the long run. So Shreya, Subhashish, again, your masterclasses have been hugely successful. I know it from the data, but every time I speak to you, I personally feel that I'm wiser. So thanks so much for illuminating me and the larger Network Capital family. And actually, this is public, so the world at large about this program. I know it'll do really well, and you have full support from NC always. Thank you both. Take care and be well, safe.